This is Jason, the curator of comics, coming at you with an episode of Comics Corner here on the interwebs. Now, I'm going to talk about Deadpool 2, which I saw last night, as of this recording, anyways, and it was pretty good. I'm not going to say that Deadpool 2 was better than Deadpool 1 because, honestly, it's kind of hard to make that judgment. In all actuality, it's it could be argued that Deadpool 2 is better than Deadpool 1, but I honestly feel like I enjoyed both films equally. I liked a lot of the references in Deadpool 1 versus the references in Deadpool 2. It's actually kind of a really close call, honestly. I think the bigger thing that I enjoyed was the villain and the story of Deadpool 1 versus Deadpool 2. Even though Deadpool 2 had far more greater, or used the Marvel Universe to a greater degree, and in many ways was a superior film for it. Um, Now, I'm not going to spoil anything because Deadpool 2 is relatively new, but I will say this. If you loved the first movie, you're going to love this one. There are no real steps backwards here, and I think it really does kind of come down to personal preference as to how you feel about sequels and how you feel about the addition of more characters. I believe it's a bigger and better sequel. One of the main villains of the film is the Juggernaut, which is great, and that's the other thing, is that Deadpool 2 is, I think, the first step into bridging the gap between the X-Men movies and Wolverine and all that other stuff, and bridging that now that 20th Century Fox is and Marvel are now a part of the same family with Disney and whatnot. It'll be interesting to see how they go forward. The film does pretty much kind of set up, almost telegraphs rather, a sequel in the form of an X-Force movie, which I am perfectly fine with because I really like the characters in X-Force. Josh Brolin's Cable. I personally would have preferred Ron Perlman to be Cable, but Josh Brolin actually did a really good job as Cable. I think that he did a much better job with this role than he did in, say, Jonah Hex, and it's very easy to see why Cable was chosen. Cable kind of plays almost the initial villain in the movie, but then he kind of gets on the same page with Deadpool. Again, I'm not going to spoil what or why or how that happens, but it's very interesting. There are a couple of things that just in the end of the day don't make sense even for a Deadpool film. The whole time travel aspect of Cable, for those of you who know nothing about Cable, Cable is the son of Cyclops, and his mutant ability is essentially that he is a cyborg with the ability to time travel. And even though Cable is quote unquote this like seasoned time traveler, apparently he only gets two time charges to make jumps back and forth, which seems like a bit of a design flaw to me. It's kind of like the DeLorean, only at least you could argue that the DeLorean was in Back to the Future was built on inexact science, whereas you think in the future, with all the mutants and everything that's happened, they master time travel or something to that degree, just going forward. But overall, I'd still say that the movie is a great one. I really am looking forward to it. Another thing I was disappointed by was the end of the credit sequence. Not that they weren't funny, but I was actually kind of expecting a little bit more. I was expecting a teaser for the new for the X-Force movie as opposed to what we ended up getting. I will say that the movie does also manage to tug a bit on your hearts, a bit more on your heartstrings than the first one did. Even though, admittedly, if you are a seasoned comics fan, you could probably have seen the final twist with the whole thing a mile away, especially once you turned your brain back on. But even if you just if you let yourself get absorbed in the moment, it is actually a really good, nice little end sequence there, very emotional. And it starts out very emotionally strong too. Some of the humor again is a bit of a hit or is a bit hit and miss. I think it really depends on whether or not you enjoy the extremely crude, which is Deadpool's, kind of MO, his modus operandi. But at the same time, I do feel like some of this was very low ball, jokes because, in all honesty, I've read a lot of Deadpool comics and from the modern era, and he may be crass and he may be vulgar, but I don't think that they go into kind of the juvenile territory that they do with this. And in a lot of ways, I'd say that other than the uber violence, it's kind of almost that crudeness in the humor that kind of sets it apart and makes it an R-rated film. Not in a bad way, in a good way, but it also doesn't necessarily help it stand out nearly as much as it would if, say, the writing was just rock solid from start to finish. And actually, I should rephrase that. It's not that the writing is bad. The writing is great. It just kind of comes down to your personal preference and style of humor, and the writing, as in that sense, will probably start to grate on you a little bit if you are not into the type of toilet humor or juvenile humor that you probably saw a little bit of in the first movie. I will say this: Ryan Reynolds though nails it. He really, really has gotten invested in this character, and I can really respect the fact that he's taken this as a passion project. And in just 2 years of across two films, Deadpool has reminded people that superheroes can be fun and over the top and crazy and yet still have a bit of a point to them, because Deadpool does at the end of the day have a bit of a point to him as a character, and that point is that he is basically chaos incarnate, for lack of a better term. Where he goes, trouble follows. But even then, it's not necessarily a bad thing so much as it is just, again, up to personal preference of to whether or not you enjoy that type of character. But in many ways, I can kind of see why people, dislike the Suicide Squad movie after watching, say, like Deadpool, because Deadpool, in many ways, was kind of what you would have hoped the Suicide Squad movie would have been on the whole. But I still like both films. I mean, I'm not going to kid myself when I say that Deadpool and Deadpool 2 are both probably two of my favorite Marvel cinematics, as well as just two of my favorite comic book movies in general, and a lot of that has to do with a deep appreciation for the character. So, speaking of which, I guess my final verdict on Deadpool 2 is definitely on par with the first, if not a little bit, weaker in certain elements. Definitely worth a watch. Definitely not a bad film or a bad sequel in that regard. You just kind of got to know what you're getting yourself into, and if you saw the first one, then you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. And even then, it's not necessarily a bad thing that it's kind of a lot of the same stuff except bigger and better, which is what a sequel should be in a lot of regards. I definitely recommend seeing it, and it'll probably be one of those things where you'll have to maybe watch it subsequent times in order to get the most out of it. I know that it kind of again was something that it isn't necessarily sticking as much in my brain, except for a couple of the very more graphic scenes in the entire film, which I don't know why, but I guess that's kind of testament to the type of movie the whole thing is that it's the graphic stuff that you end up associating with as memorable. Anyway, speaking of films, so recently it was announced that the Birds of Prey movie, which is set to start filming in 2019, the DC film Birds of Prey, is going to film not with an all-female cast, which even that might be pushing it, but actually an all-female crew too. And I really am of two minds of this. My first mindset is that, did these people learn nothing from Ghostbusters? Has DC learned nothing from the failure that was the 2016 Ghostbusters movie. I mean, say what you will about the whole thing. Ghostbusters fans didn't like it, and it had nothing to do with the sex or being sexist or anything like that. Movie fans didn't like it either because they just didn't find it funny or entertaining. From all the things that I've read, a very select few people liked the thing on its own merits, and even fewer liked it as it stood as a concept. So, Birds of Prey, now, admittedly, in the defense of Birds of Prey, it is an all female superhero team by default. So, it's not like the idea of an all female cast is, a bad thing or it's foreign here. However, I am personally of the opinion that when you start to try and incorporate a all gendered thing for everything from the crew, this includes the director, the writer, the producer, the editors, and all that stuff, down to everybody who provides catering, and all that other stuff. That's kind of where you start to lose me. Don't get me wrong, if they can get capable, very well, women with great resumes who are legitimately invested in the project and want to do it, and all these other things, and are actually good at what they do, like they're not just getting hired because they are women, then, I view it kind of like I do with the whole idea of the Black Panther thing. The idea that it's making a political statement is kind of secondary, or a political statement, a statement by having, highly, racial, or a cast that favors, a more highly racial diverse in the favor of African Americans. None of that matters to me if the film is good. But and with Marvel, I'm actually, inclined to cut them some slack because, like I said, Marvel has made, in the past, I've said that Marvel's made very few bad movies. And that's true. They've made very few poor cinematic showings in recent memory. Like in the last 15 years, critical metrics will probably tell you that most people have liked almost every single Marvel film, at least to some degree, over the last 15 years. That's a pretty good track record. DC, on the other hand, you've got Justice League, which a lot of people unfairly criticized. You've got Suicide Squad, which I don't think a lot of people were in the right mindset to enjoy, and I personally will defend to the death that it's not nearly as bad as people make it out to be. But Batman vs. Superman was not good. I will never defend that. I mean, it had some elements, but I'll never defend it on the whole. Um, the bottom line, though, then, is DC has a very, very, very extremely questionable track record in terms of live action cinema. Now, their animated stuff is great. Like, I have yet to watch a bad animated DC feature film, but even then, that's animated, not, actually, live action. And a lot of the live action stuff isn't even necessarily bad by DC. It's just mediocre, dark, and morose. And that's not what we want from superhero movies. So it's going to be up to whoever ends up writing Birds of Prey. Like, I'd probably go with, say, Gail Simone, or at the very least, I'd have Gail Simone, whose work with the Birds of Prey is probably, if not her finest, some of her best work. I would say that, get Gail Simone to either write the thing or actually be a writing consultant. Get maybe Patty Jenkins or another female or another famous female director who gives a care about the DC universe. Maybe a female producer or two, but not an entire production staff. You can try your best, to actually have some degree of equality, but it's when you are trying to make a film that is trying to make a statement for the medium first, as opposed to an actual good piece of art and an enjoyable entertainment second. That's kind of where I draw the line, because think of all the movies in recent years where, they've talked about characters, in fact, here was another one actually. What was it? Geez. Yesterday I read that apparently the Star Wars solo writer for the movie Solo says that, or the actor, I can't remember which now. So I apologize if I get it wrong one way or the other. But he says that Lando Calrissian in this film is quote unquote pansexual, and that's great. If you, but here's the thing. I don't care about that stuff. I care about good entertainment. And if that stuff is legitimately part of their character and it's written in well enough, I will either, respect it because it will be a very fleshed out part of their personality, or I will be, just ignore it and move on. Or the third option is I will be annoyed that this type of thing is shoved down my throat, and I will realize that I am having my time wasted because instead of trying to tell a good story, even if it means relying on, taking no risks or, falling back on a couple tropes or two, instead they try to be so, some films or filmmakers or, projects like these, they try to be so progressive or they try to be so deep and, into art that they end up sacrificing, a lot of their own creative and artistic soul. Ironically, in an attempt to become artistically, diverse, they become pretentious and they become derided and eventually they'll become forgotten because it's not something that somebody is going to want to rewatch more than once, probably, if they feel that they're being preached and, just in general, they don't have a good time enjoying the film or whatever as a piece of media on its own. You need to make entertaining media first, and then you can start breaking down barriers. If you can't make something entertaining, it doesn't matter how diverse your film cast is, it doesn't matter how diverse your crew is. All that means is that you're wasting time and money to try and make essentially a political and social statement that in the end nobody's going to care about because nobody is going to, or not a lot of people or as many people are going to watch it, and they're not all going to care. They're not going to think the same way you do. And while your efforts to maybe convince them otherwise may be admirable on the surface, yeah, it's still not going to work because most people aren't going to want to be preached to in this type of, manner. And I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. I know that that's probably going to break a lot of people who would say, yeah, an all-female proposed crew and cast would be awesome. It'd be totally progressive and everything. And like I said, on the surface, you could make it work. Like you could have, like in all honesty, you could have made the female Ghostbusters work in a lot of ways. But a lot of that came down to it wasn't something that they thought out, that they was well thought out, and that they had done to make the characters their own or as a continuation for a new generation. They bastardized it. That's what they did. And I'm not saying that Birds of Prey has, some high bar that it's got to clear, because it doesn't, because it'll be the first of its kind in terms of a female superhero team. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for it. I think I'd personally rather see Gotham City Sirens because I think that would probably be a more interesting, team up than Birds of Prey, especially if they don't pick a unique villain for Birds of Prey. And that's the other problem too. It's like if you're going to do something that is beloved yet outside of comics fans, the further you dig into the more obscure, you need to make sure that you have at least something that the mainstream fans can recognize and latch onto. And with Birds of Prey, it probably wouldn't be, with the exception of like maybe Batgirl or something like that, it wouldn't be any of the characters, the main characters. It would probably have to be one of the villains. And then that also kind of goes into the other, problem that another pitfall you could have. Are you going to make the villain so generically and stereotypically just an anti-woman misogynist? Is that what you're going to do? Because if you do that, then again, you're essentially just killing whatever, investment people might have in the characters, because people are basically saying that I could see this type of stuff on Tumblr, and more importantly, I'd be more entertained by it because I wouldn't have to spend money or time outside of hopping onto the web, it's kind of a catch-22 because like I'm trying my best to not completely dismiss the idea as terrible because it could work theoretically if they pick the people based on their achievements in the industry and their passion for the project. But I honestly, given the track record, and unfortunately for a lot of people like myself included, Ghostbusters 2016 set the terrible precedent that if not completely managed correctly, not like if not planned and actively thought out to the most minute detail to be entertaining first and then be a social statement second, you're going to end up with something that is going to very much alienate people. It's not going to entertain and it's not going to make its social statement in the end, which then makes it a double fail. It'd be bad enough if, say, something isn't entertaining or it but makes a social statement. Then you could say, yeah, it's pretentious, but at least it's trying to do something special. Or, something that's just mindless entertainment in many ways, like Deadpool was. Both Deadpool 1 and 2 is a great example to kind of bring this all back around in a circle here. Deadpool 1 and 2 are never going to be considered high art in terms of the writing, like for the cinema. Like it's not going to be like this magnum opus great journey or of the like, but it is entertaining, it's fun, it knows its audience and it knows exactly what it wants to do, and as such it is entertaining and it is fun and all those other things that, depending on how you look at it, it could very, very well, not be fun and entertaining if in the wrong hands. It's all about the people who are trying to make the film work, and all the people that are actively also acting in the film also. So, I mean, obviously, the whole story is conjecture because it's not even going to start filming until 2019. And we've still got like a couple of DC films that are going to be coming out this year alone, like during the summer blockbuster blitz and then the fall blitz as well. That'll probably take all the attention away from this. But right now, it's one of the few DC movie talking points. And that in and of itself is a little bit bad and dubious because, well, let's be honest, if you're talking exclusively almost about this and nobody else is talking about your actual film projects that have finished production and stuff, that's never a good sign. It means that DC hasn't fostered a brand, at least in the live action film mainstream, that people are going to do anything or are not going to focus on pre-production drama. And that's the other thing too. Has DC and Warner Brothers, have they learned nothing from the production drama that Batman and Superman and Man of Steel and Justice League, basically every film except for Wonder Woman, suffered from? Apparently not, because they're still going down the same road. And one can only hope that they correct course, but I will honestly say that while the jury's out, I'm kind of leaning toward this being just one more step towards disaster for DC in terms of live-action films, which is a shame because I actually prefer their comics to Marvel. Not to say that I dislike Marvel, but I prefer DC, to Marvel. And in all honesty, it's the films that really keep me invested in Marvel in all honesty. So it's actually kind of amazing to think that the one thing that I'd want DC to do better than Marvel, they just seemingly can't, at least not right now. But those are just my thoughts and opinions. If you guys have any that you'd like to share, feel free to let me know in the comments. And of course, thank you for listening and hope that you like, share, and subscribe the video. Until next time, I know I've been gone for a while, but until next time, hopefully it will be sooner than the last time I left abruptly. I'll see you guys on the next episode of Comics Corner. I am Jason, the curator of comics, signing off.